Welcome, Cielo. Thank you so much for doing this video with us today. Can't wait to hear a little bit about you, and I'd love to have you start off with introducing yourself and telling us, when you graduated from GW, the program, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, hi, nice to be here. My name is Cielo Contreras. I graduated with an MPA in December 2012.
And now you are.
Oh, sorry. Now I'm the Vice President of Development at Grounded Solutions Network. We're a national nonprofit focused on affordable housing solutions.
Excellent, excellent. All right, I'm just going to go launch right into my questions. Today I have four for you. I'm going to start with, sometimes I ask some follow-up ones, so it might not stick with four, but what's the best networking advice you've received?
Um, One of the best pieces of advice I've received is that people do actually want to help you. And I think a lot of us, I especially had the mentality that uh, you have to help yourself and, figure things out yourself as much as possible. And you don't need to reach out to people to ask them for connections or advice or whatever it is. But the truth is, it helps a lot and it doesn't make you weaker. It actually makes you more strategic and more effective. And people really do want to help you, especially, even if the connection is as far away as like we're just both alums of the same program. Most people do, want to see others succeed in their field and are willing to lend a few minutes of time, especially if you make it easy for them.
Yes, we have alums who are obviously alums who are very eager to help our students and recent alums, and we're really grateful to all of you for that. Great. So basically, don't feel that you're doing something wrong by doing it. You're doing something right by reaching out to people.
Exactly. And the worst they could do is say no. And a lot of times people say no just because they don't have time or they aren't the best person to help you. But I have found that most people do want to try and help if they can. And there's no harm in asking.
Did you ever feel uncomfortable reaching out?
Oh, for sure. Um, and especially before I was in the position where I was being asked for things. And now I am no longer uncomfortable with that just because I've been on both ends of it and know that it's not that big a deal. And it's definitely way easier to do this, send a LinkedIn message and people can respond to it or not. Once you get over that, truly, like no one's gonna do anything to you if you ask.
I love that. I'm going to use that in my appointments. It's not that big a deal. I think that's great because people get really nervous about it. And even the
And
ones
it's true.
working.
It's hard to reach out to a person you don't know. It really is. And but no, nothing's gonna happen if the worst again, the worst that can happen is that they don't respond or they're not gonna take away your degree or say no, you're not getting any jobs ever.
Love that. It's not that big a deal. That's great. Okay, let's move on. What specific action did you take that significantly impacted any of your searches?
A couple things, and I'm gonna shout out the career services department for this one because I have worked with Denise a few times on my resume and my LinkedIn profile. And especially one of the last times I worked with her, she looked at my LinkedIn and gave me tips on just how to make it the most effective. And in times that I've looked for jobs, I did make sure I checked those settings so that recruiters could find me and make sure that there was information in there that I definitely wanted recruiters to find in the descriptions of my job, making sure to fill out the descriptions and kind of successes I had in each position, basically to give folks as much useful information, not too much, but useful information for searches. And I was recruited through LinkedIn for this current job that I have. And it's not a job, I was mostly in education and youth serving nonprofits prior to that. And probably would not have applied to this job just because it wasn't my specific field. But a recruiter found me, and once I heard more about it, I was like, oh, this does make sense, and here I am.
That's great. I think that a lot of people focus on the resume, which of course makes sense.
Yes.
But I just saw a post on LinkedIn from one of the big content creators in the career services world that said recruiters, millions, well, maybe millions is an exaggeration. Many recruiters see your LinkedIn profile, zero see your hard drive. So if your resume is on your computer, nobody's going to know unless you actually submit it for a job. But if it's on LinkedIn, people can find you. And I think sometimes people don't pay as much attention to that LinkedIn profile. So I'll put a little plug to come to talk to either one of us about LinkedIn profiles.
Yeah, definitely helpful. And helpful for it to be a little different than the resume, but still have some key info on, someone may not know, well, what kind of fundraising did you do? What kind of development person were you? But if you have a little context, that can be super helpful.
Yeah, that's one of the big questions when we do talk about LinkedIn profiles is should it exactly match the resume? It doesn't have to exactly match, and LinkedIn can be a conversation that you have with somebody rather than strict bullet points like the format of a resume calls for. So I love that. I love that you brought up the LinkedIn profile. Excellent. Okay. Question number three. What have you found most helpful in preparing for an interview? Talking about nerve-wracking things.
Mhm. Yeah, a couple things. One is remembering that the interview is for you too. So you should have your questions that you want to ask them, and make sure that you understand, what you're potentially getting into. Because I think we focus so much on the questions we are going to be asked, and we should. That's important. But I think, in times when I've interviewed folks for positions and you get to the end and you ask, what questions do you have for us? It's not great when they don't have very thoughtful questions for you and that clearly they weren't ready for that answer. And I think, in those questions, I tend to ask anything from very specific things like, what is your fundraising goal this year? Did you make it? What is, tell me more about whatever events or components of your fundraising program that you have. But I also really love to ask about culture, team dynamics. I love asking and being asked actually, like, what's your favorite thing about your job? And also, what's something about your job that you wish was a little different, or, what's something you're working to change, whatever it is. Because you want to get that too. You want to get a sense of the organization. I have been in jobs where it wasn't a good fit. And not that I would have learned that from the interview process, but there might have been signs. And so I think that's important. The other thing is be ready with examples of work you've done. Um, so much of interview questions are like, tell us about a time when you X, Y, or Z. And a lot of that time, your interviewers are asking for, if a time that you had a challenge and you had to figure something out or pivot your strategy in, or have a difficult conversation with a colleague on a project, various things. And so much of that, even if you're earlier in your career, you can use school to answer a lot of those questions. I mean, that's why we do group projects. And there are times where you have to coordinate with other people. And so I think, they don't all have to be specifically work related. They can be experiences you've had in group projects, in organizations, extracurriculars, all of those things.
Excellent. Yeah, I know a lot of times people say, well, I haven't had work experience with these kinds of issues. And I love that you called out that it's not just about work experience, especially at the graduate level.
Mhm.
I think people tend to undersell the importance of what they're doing as a graduate student to a potential employer, especially at an entry level, but
For
not
sure.
just entry. So,
And I was part-time for a chunk of my time in grad school, and So were some of my classmates. And when we did group projects, and especially the capstone, coordinating everyone's schedules and lives and tracking the work and making sure everyone was like on top of the thing that they were supposed to be doing. That takes effort and um probably why the program is designed that way because that's actually how work works. And it can be really frustrating to be in group projects sometimes. But also I think it's really helpful experience and you can use that in an interview to demonstrate how you've gone through situations like that.
You mentioned it's not great when somebody doesn't have good, intelligent questions to ask. And I'm just curious if you have an example of some of the kinds of questions that you go, really? That's what you asked me?
It's mostly when the questions are only logistics questions about the job. And you should not, that's not to say like don't ask those, but if it's only those, like what is the vacation time like? What is like when will I hear back from you? What like those sorts of things. Those are useful and I like to kind of ask those a little bit differently. So like how do people um what is the culture of the organization around taking time off and like coverage for work because that tells you a lot more actually than we get X amount of vacation days. But if you kind of get an answer like, yeah, we really prioritize time off, we care a lot about people taking care of themselves. We don't expect you to be on email like when you're on paid time off. Things like that, I think, tell you more about the culture than the number of days you're going to get. I think the same around you want to get a better sense of like not just, yeah, we have health insurance, we have, and those are, again, very important. But sometimes, depending on the organization and the process, the interview process, you might not even be talking to the right person about those types of benefits. And so getting a sense of that is important. Um, but I think asking more questions about the position, what does success look like? What would I think questions about onboarding are really helpful. Like, what does the training look like? What's, kind of getting at the answers like especially entry level, at what point will you be expecting me to be, fully working independently on projects with deadlines, for example? How long is the training and onboarding process and what does that look like and what kinds of people does that interact with? I think that just shows that you've thought about it a little bit more than just like a more surface level question.
That makes total sense. I think those are some really great questions that people can ask. Um, I'm just going to throw this in there. Um, Sometimes people find that the questions they had were answered during the course of the interview. And how do you feel about, I had a number of questions and I think we've actually ticked off all of these questions. Does that still leave the same negative impression as not having questions?
It does not. And even, and I've been in situations like that too, where they did actually answer my question in the process. In those situations, sometimes I find I can ask for a little more detail. And, I'll say something like, oh, I'm really glad you talked about X because I had a question about that. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? If you can figure it out. I mean, don't make them repeat themselves, but just, ask for a little more context. But like specifically name, I did want to ask that. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Um, just so you show that you're prepared, you thought about it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to handle that because I think that does happen. I know when I interview people, I'm a little chatty and oftentimes they'll say, I think you answered all my questions. So that's great. Okay, last question for you. What action or strategy have you taken that you think's been the most impactful generally on your career advancement?
I think one of the things has been, you know, the fact that you can try things out, uh, and they may work out and they may also not. Um, for example, and not everyone has the privilege to try everything out. I recognize that. But in a previous job I've always been sort of in nonprofit fundraising. Um, and I had the opportunity to step into an interim executive director role when our executive director left. And I had been toying with the idea of maybe wanting to be an executive director in the past, but wasn't sure. And I was really grateful for the opportunity and learned a lot, but also figured out that I didn't want to be an executive director. And I think, you may not always get the chance to do something like that, especially to try it out in a short amount of time. But I think that accepting stretch assignments, trying out new things within your role and within your organization, I think, small nonprofits are great for that. And again, not possible everywhere. But if you do get the chance to try something a little bit outside of your typical role, within reason, without like, keeping mind of your time and stress level and um, what's on your plate. Uh, that has always been a time when it's just been really useful for me. So my first job, I was an executive assistant to the head of a nonprofit, and the person who wrote our grant reports had left. Um, and this was a while ago when you had to, format them in Word and literally print them out and mail them to submit. A lot these days, it's a lot online portal. But as the executive assistant, part of my job was to do the proofread and the formatting and to, put it all together to get out the door. So the person had left. But since I had worked on so many of them already, I kind of knew what went into them. And so I volunteered to write it, and they let me. And it ended up being something I was good at and also really enjoyed. And thus my grant writing career was born. And, that nobody asked me to do that. I volunteered, and I, was lucky enough that they allowed me to do it and trusted me to do it. Um, but it was such yeah, again, it started my career. And I've been fundraising ever since for many years. Uh, and you have to find those moments where you can get them, and sometimes they're giving to you, sometimes you have to ask for them. Um, but you do the best that you can with the opportunity, and you might end up with something you really enjoy, which in my case was grant writing. And sometimes you don't enjoy it, which in my case was being an executive director. And but I think both were really valuable experiences. And there are things that I learned as an executive director that I, have brought back to being a fundraiser.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for these terrific answers to these very often asked questions. Really appreciate it. And I know that our students are going to learn quite a bit from viewing this video. So thanks again.
Thank you.